All righty. Thank you so much for inviting me. Before we get started on my presentation, I just want to again extend my gratitude to all of you for the incredible partnership that I feel that we have had through the development of the CCAA and now the implementation. I think it's very rare that we have something, especially of this scope, that we have such a professional and dedicated effort to this agreement, and just even the idea of thinking about other species that might be able to be covered. I just think of the future conservation benefits, but also the regulatory certainty that this provides for you folks. So this has been amazing, and I am extremely grateful, and I thank you for this partnership. And I also just want to say, once again, whenever I do tune into any of your meetings and hear Iris and Dan go through just like the toolkit and how impressive that toolkit is, all the different things that are available through there, and how promptly you folks try to solve problems and make this as easy as possible for folks to engage in the CCAA. It's all impressive. So thank you. For those of you that listened in to my presentation when we made the finding in December, this is the same presentation. So it's not a very long presentation, but I thought, especially since this is being recorded, I wanted to pretty much do the same presentation. And so there may be some background on monarchs. It's just short, that all of you already know, but I'm still going to step through all of that. So here we go. All right. So this will be a very high level overview about the monarch butterfly, and I will cover a little bit about its range, its population, and the migration. I'm also going to talk about the petition to list the monarch, the process that we followed to conduct this rigorous species status assessment, and then what our warranted but precluded finding means, and some of the next steps. I'll also highlight the monarch conservation efforts at the end, and then we can take your questions. So as I think all of you know, monarch migration is an amazing phenomenon. In the spring, adults migrate from wintering grounds in Mexico for the eastern population, in California for the western population. Through several generations, they migrate as far north as Canada. Adults 3 or 4 generations removed from those that begin the trip in the spring travel the entire distance back to wintering grounds in the fall. And these are the monarchs that begin the northward migration the following spring. Monarchs have expanded across the globe to 29 countries. So our species status assessment looked at monarchs globally, but the ancestral origins for monarchs worldwide are these long distance migratory populations that are found in the eastern and western North America. And these migratory populations were the main focus of our analysis. For a little context, the eastern population historically and currently supports, we estimate, over 90% of the world's monarchs. You've probably all seen these graphs. As these graphs show, monarchs have been in decline over the last 20 years. The eastern and western monarch migratory populations are measured by estimating the populations in their overwintering sites in Mexico and California each year. Monarchs in the eastern population, which is the orange graph, cluster in great numbers in a small area in the mountains of central Mexico during winter, making it impossible to count them individually. Instead, this population is estimated by the size of the area it occupies. Monarch numbers in the eastern population fell from an estimated 384 million monarchs, which is about 45 acres, in 1996, to fewer than 60 million monarchs, which is about 7.5 acres, in 2019. Numbers dipped to a low of about 14 million in 2013. Usually the wintering numbers, the wintering surveys from Mexico usually come out in late February or early March. So we'll expect in the next month or so to hear about what the numbers are like this past winter in Mexico. The Western population, which is the green graph, which winters primarily in coastal California, has seen a more precipitous decline from about 1.2 million in 1997 to fewer than 30,000 in 2019. And you can see that the numbers are declining even though the efforts to count monarchs have increased in the past decade, as shown by that blue line. And we know that the numbers from what they call the Thanksgiving count for the Western monarch population are bad. They usually do a second count over New Year's, so I expect in the next week or so we should hear the final estimate for that. So the petition process. In August 2014, we received a petition from the Center for Biological Diversity, the Center for Food Safety, Xerces Society, and a private individual to list the monarch under the Endangered Species Act. We made a substantial 90-day finding on the petition in December 2014. Due to litigation settlement that required us to make a 12-month finding in June 2019, we began work on the species status assessment in 2016, which was earlier than we'd scheduled. We subsequently worked with plaintiffs to extend that deadline to December 15th of 2020, which allowed us to gather 2 additional years of overwintering data. Species status assessment, or I'll call it an SSA, is a rigorous analysis of the best available science, which is the foundation for Endangered Species Act decisions. The assessment incorporates information regarding life history, biology, and consideration of current and future vulnerabilities. The team that we had for that Monarch SSA consisted of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologists from across the country, and we had representatives from the states, MAFWA, the Midwest, the Northeast, and Western associations participate in that. The final SSA report, which is available on our website, describes the positive and negative influences on the future condition of monarchs and projects future outcomes based on millions of simulations we ran. Key influences are the availability of milkweed and nectar sources, availability and quality of overwintering habitat in Mexico and California, exposure to insecticides, the effects of climate change that result in increased exposure to unsuitably high temperatures, and then the conservation efforts that restore and improve habitat. In the monarch's current condition, the probability that the Eastern North American population will reach the point that extinction is inevitable is less than 10% over the next 10 years. The Western North American population has a much higher probability, just 60 to 68%, of reaching that point due to current threats over the next 10 years. Those estimates were made before these recent Thanksgiving counts. I imagine the Thanksgiving counts were so grim that estimate might increase if we were to run it again. We found the probability climbs for the Western when projected over 30 years, varying from 24 to 46% for the Eastern population and up to 92 to 95% for the Western population. At the current and projected population levels, both the Eastern and Western populations become more vulnerable to catastrophic events, such as extreme storms or widespread drought over time. The Monarch Conservation Database is the primary tool we use to gauge the conservation gains or uplift from conservation efforts since 2014. These figures here represent the totals from data provided by database users. Almost 49,000 conservation efforts are resulting in 5.6 million acres of monarch habitat and almost 500 million milkweed stems. Activities recorded in the database include those by the rights-of-way CCA, certificate of inclusion members, by state agencies, Fish and Wildlife Services, Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program, NRCS, tribes and other NGOs, and private entities. This is an important tool. This database remains open as our effort to gather information on conservation efforts continues. There were 3 possible outcomes to the petition process. The 12-month finding can be warranted, and if that had been the finding, we would have immediately published a proposed rule to list as endangered or threatened with a public comment period. We could have also found that listing was not warranted, which means that the petition process would have stopped without a proposed listing. And finally, we can determine that listing is warranted but precluded by listing actions of higher priority, which is the finding that we made for Monarch. Through our national listing work plan, we prioritize our workload based on the needs of candidate and petition species while providing greater clarity and predictability about the timing of listing determinations for the public. It also ensures we make expeditious progress on these actions. Next steps. With this finding, the monarch becomes a candidate species. This means we will review the monarch status every year to determine if its listing priorities should change. We're adding it to our national listing work plan to be done in 2024, which is when we intend to issue a proposed rule if listing is still warranted at that time. Monarch conservation remains among the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's highest priorities, and we remain committed to continuing our work to improve monarch populations and to support the efforts of our partners. As Dan just talked about a little bit, if we propose to list in 2024, there would then be a public comment period. And after that, by law, we have 1 year to make a final decision. So a final decision would have to come in 2025. As you all know, monarchs have captured people's attention and catalyzed efforts to turn things around to ensure the monarch's long-term persistence. The states are providing their strategic landscape level planning through the Mid-American and Western conservation plans. And you folks, energy and transportation organizations, are stepping up to conserve monarchs on rights-of-way through this CCAA. We're also working with agricultural partners and USDA through the Working Lands for Wildlife and their conservation reserve programs. The Tribal Alliance for Pollinators is uniting tribes in the shared effort to restore monarch habitat. And millions of dollars have been leveraged through National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Monarch Butterfly and Pollinators Conservation Fund. As you all know, organizations large and small, public and private, local communities, clubs, youth programs, and citizen science projects are doing great things for monarchs across the country through habitat conservation, monitoring, and outreach and education. Monarch conservation continues to require an all-hands-on-deck approach in all sectors across the continent. From the smallest backyard garden to landscape-scale conservation, it will take all of us to ensure the future of monarch. This warranted but precluded finding allows us to give needed attention to listing actions for other species, but it's also incentive to ramp up conservation efforts even further and tackle some of the even harder challenges facing monarchs. So this is just this quick overview of our process and our finding. On that website that's listed there, we have information about the finding. And so you can look at that and get a copy of the status assessment, a copy of the finding, all kinds of other information.